The blood test results sat on my kitchen counter, stark white paper reflecting the afternoon sun. 3 numbers, 2 columns, and a single irrefutable conclusion that would shatter my family forever. 99.9% probability of exclusion. My brother Eric wasn't my father's biological son. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at those clinical words, my coffee growing cold beside the papers. How do you tell someone that the identity they've worn for 32 years doesn't belong to them? Especially when that someone has spent those same 32 years treating you like dirt beneath their designer shoes. The brother who called me pathetic at our father's funeral just 3 months ago. The memory of that day still burns like acid in my throat. Standing beside Dad's casket, trying to hold myself together as Eric leaned in close, champagne on his breath, to whisper, "Look at you, Jackson." Still Daddy's little disappointment. Couldn't even afford a proper suit for his funeral. He'd smirked, straightening his own tailored jacket. Pathetic. I'm Marshall Jackson Bailey, 35 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed I was the family failure. The one who couldn't measure up. The one who wasn't Bailey material. That's what my father would say whenever I brought home anything less than perfection, while Eric's mediocrity was celebrated like Olympic gold. Dad left everything to Eric, the family business, the lake house, even Mom's jewelry collection that should have been split between us. I got Dad's old Chevy and a check that barely covered 1 semester at community college. The inheritance of the afterthought. The consolation prize for existing in Eric's shadow. I wouldn't have even ordered the DNA test, if not for my Aunt Claudia's deathbed confession. "Your mother had an affair," she'd whispered, tubes snaking from her arms, her voice barely audible over the hospital machines. Before Eric was born. With Thomas, Robert's business partner. She'd gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Your father suspected. That's why he could never love Eric the way he loved you." I didn't believe her at first. Aunt Claudia had always been dramatic, full of family gossip and conspiracy theories. But her words burrowed under my skin like splinters. Impossible to ignore. So I ordered the tests. 1 for me, 1 for Eric. Taken without his knowledge from a water bottle, at the reading of Dad's will. The results arrived on a Tuesday. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday that would divide my life into before and after. I didn't call Eric immediately. Instead, I drove to Dad's grave with the test results folded in my pocket. The cemetery was empty, morning mist still clinging to the headstones. I stood there for almost an hour, trying to understand a lifetime of favoritism that suddenly made twisted sense. "You knew," I said to the granite stone bearing my father's name. "All those years, all those times you pushed me harder, expected more from me, you knew I was your only true son." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up with Eric was like living with a golden child. 3 years older, always taller, always first in our father's eyes. Or so I thought. While I struggled with math homework at the kitchen table, Dad would clap Eric on the shoulder for C+ grades. "That's my boy," he'd say, ignoring my A papers displayed hopefully on the refrigerator. When I made varsity basketball as a sophomore, Dad missed every game. When Eric barely made the football team, Dad never missed a Friday night, even rescheduling business trips to watch from the stands. He'd cheer so loud for Eric's modest gains on the field that people would turn to stare. Mom would give me apologetic looks, squeeze my shoulder, whisper that Dad was just harder on me because he saw my potential. But words don't fill the hollow space where a father's pride should live. By 18, I'd accepted my place in the family hierarchy. Second place. The backup son. Eric went to Dad's alma mater on a legacy scholarship. I stayed local, worked nights at the movie theater to pay tuition, graduated with honors that no one in my family attended to witness. Eric dropped out after 3 years, started working at Dad's company, and was made vice president by 25, despite having no real qualifications. I built my own small construction business from nothing. With no help, no connections, no Bailey name opening doors. You've always been jealous of your brother, Dad said the last time we argued, about 3 months before his heart attack. When are you going to grow up and stop this petty competition? I'd laughed bitterly. Competition requires 2 participants, Dad. You've only ever had one son in this race. He'd flinched at that, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, but then it was gone, replaced by the familiar disappointment. After standing at Dad's grave for what felt like hours, I finally made the call. We need to talk, I told Eric. Tonight. It's important. Kinda busy running a company here, little brother, he said, the smirk audible in his voice. Some of us have actual responsibilities. It's about Dad, I said, knowing it was the only hook that would work. Something you don't know. There was a pause. Fine. My place. 7. Don't be late. Eric lived in a sprawling house on the lake, bought with his first executive bonus. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Imported marble. A garage full of cars he rarely drove. The physical manifestation of the favoritism I'd endured my entire life. He answered the door in loafers and a cashmere sweater, tumbler of whiskey already in hand. This better be worth my time, he said, leading me into a living room bigger than my entire apartment. I sat on the edge of an uncomfortable modern sofa, the envelope heavy in my hands. Did Dad ever talk to you about Thomas Reynolds? I asked. Eric frowned. Dad's old business partner? The one who moved to Seattle? What about him? Did you ever notice any tension between them? Anything strange? Eric sipped his whiskey, impatience written across his face. They had a falling out years ago. Business disagreement. Why are we talking about ancient history? I took a deep breath. I think it was more personal than business. What are you getting at, Marshall? Some conspiracy theory about Dad's company? Looking for a way to contest the will? He laughed, always trying to get what you didn't earn. The familiar condescension ignited something in me. I pulled the papers from the envelope and placed them on the glass coffee table between us. DNA results, I said. Mine. And yours. Eric stared at the papers, not touching them. What kind of sick game is this? No game, just truth. You're not Dad's biological son, Eric. Thomas Reynolds is your father. The color drained from his face. For a moment, I saw the little boy beneath the arrogant mask. Lost, confused, afraid. Then his expression hardened. Bullshit. This is just another pathetic attempt to... To what? I interrupted. To explain why Dad always treated us differently? Why he pushed me harder. Why he could never fully embrace you as his son. He knew, Eric. Maybe not for certain, but he suspected. Eric grabbed the papers, eyes scanning the scientific evidence that was unraveling his identity. His hands trembled slightly. This could be faked. You could have... I didn't fake anything. We can do more tests if you want. Call the company. Hell, track down Thomas Reynolds and ask him yourself. The truth won't change. He threw the papers down. Even if this is true, which I don't believe for a second, what's your point? What do you get out of this? Some sick satisfaction? Revenge? I hadn't fully asked myself that question until that moment. What did I want? Vindication? To hurt Eric the way he'd hurt me? To explain a lifetime of feeling less than? I thought I wanted you to feel what I've felt, I admitted. To understand what it's like to be the outsider in your own family. But sitting here now, seeing your face, I don't think that's it. Eric poured himself another drink, movements mechanical. Then what? Why show me this? Why not just keep it to yourself and gloat privately? Because despite everything, you're still my brother. And you deserve to know the truth about who you are. he laughed bitterly. How noble of you. Saint Marshall, always taking the high road. This isn't about being noble. It's about breaking a cycle. I leaned forward. Think about it, Eric. Dad's coldness toward you, his impossible standards for me, it messed us both up. Made us into people who can't even have a conversation without turning it into a competition. Eric stared into his glass. So what now? We hug it out and become best friends? Start a support group for dysfunctional brothers? No, I said. But maybe we stop letting Dad's issues define our relationship. Maybe we start over as adults without all this baggage. Easy for you to say. You just found out you were the real son, the legitimate Bailey. I just found out my entire identity is a lie. I shook my head. Being Robert Bailey's biological son didn't protect me from feeling worthless every day of my childhood. It didn't make me feel any more wanted or loved. DNA doesn't determine your worth, Eric. Your actions do. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 3 decades pressing down between us. Finally, Eric spoke, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Did Mom know? That I wasn't. That Thomas was. I don't know, I answered honestly. Aunt Claudia seemed to think so, but she wasn't always reliable. Mom might have suspected, like Dad did. Or maybe she convinced herself it wasn't true. She always defended me to Dad, Eric said, more to himself than to me. Always tried to bridge that gap. I thought she was just being a mom, but maybe she was trying to protect you. I finished for him. From exactly this moment. Eric stood abruptly, walking to the wall of windows overlooking the lake. His silhouette was dark against the evening sky, shoulders slightly hunched, a posture I'd never seen in my confident, bordering on arrogant brother. I need some time with this, he said, not turning around. I need to process. I stood to leave. I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for telling you, but for how much this hurts. As I reached the door, Eric's voice stopped me. Marshall? I turned. Yeah? When Dad was dying, in the hospital, he asked to see you alone. What did he say? The memory surfaced like a bruise being pressed. Dad, pale and diminished in the hospital bed, monitors beeping softly around him. His hand, once strong enough to make me flinch when raised, weak as it gripped mine. He said he was proud of me, I admitted, for building something of my own, for standing on my own 2 feet without his help. I hesitated, and he asked me to look after you. Eric's laugh was hollow. Look after me? The golden child? The heir to the Bailey throne? I think he knew you'd need it. The company, it's struggling, isn't it? Has been since before Dad got sick. Eric's silence was confirmation enough. He knew you weren't ready. I continued gently. Not because you aren't capable, but because he never really taught you. Never made you earn anything. And deep down, I think he felt guilty about that. So what, you're offering to help me now? Out of brotherly love? The sarcasm was there, but diluted. A reflexive defense rather than a true attack. No, I'm offering because despite everything, you're family. And because I'm good at what I do. My business may be small, but it's solid. I know how to build things that last. Eric turned from the window, studying me with new eyes. Not the dismissive glance of a superior, but the careful assessment of an equal. I'll think about it, he said finally. That's all I can offer right now. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It wasn't even acceptance. But it was a start, a small crack in the wall that had separated us our entire lives. As I drove home that night, I realized that the truth hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected. There was no vindication in watching someone's world collapse, even someone who had caused me pain. Instead, I felt the strange lightness that comes with setting down a heavy burden, the burden of comparison, of always measuring myself against the impossible standard of the golden child. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was competing with Eric. We were just two men, carrying different wounds inflicted by the same flawed father, trying to find our way forward. The DNA test had proven Eric wasn't Dad's son, but maybe, just maybe, it had also opened the door for us to truly become brothers. The next morning, I woke to 3 missed calls and a text from Eric. DNA test appointment tomorrow. 9 a.m. Westlake Medical. Be there. No please, no thank you. Still Eric, even with his world turned upside down. I spent the day at my construction site, checking foundations and revising blueprints, trying to focus on the solid, tangible work of building rather than the complicated mess of rebuilding a relationship with my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career creating sturdy structures while my family foundation had been built on quicksand. "You seem distracted today," said Miguel, my foreman and friend of 8 years. "Everything okay after the funeral?" I hadn't told anyone about the DNA test or Eric's true parentage. It wasn't my secret to share, even with Miguel, who'd seen me through divorce, Dad's death, and countless Bailey family disasters. "Just family stuff," I said, adjusting my hard hat. "The usual Eric drama." Miguel nodded knowingly. He'd heard enough stories over beers to understand the dynamics without details. "That guy's been riding your back since kindergarten. Time to cut him loose, man." If only it were that simple. "He's still my brother?" I said, surprising myself with how true it felt despite everything. "Half-brother," Miguel corrected, having heard me use the term often enough when explaining why Eric and I looked nothing alike. I'd always assumed it was because Eric favored Mom's side while I took after Dad. "Right," I said, unable to explain that technically, we weren't even that anymore. "Still family, though," Miguel shrugged. "Family's overrated. Friends are the family you choose." The next morning, I arrived at Westlake Medical 10 minutes early to find Eric already there, pacing the waiting room in an expensive suit, looking like he'd stepped out of a business meeting rather than come for a DNA test. "You didn't need to dress up for a cheek swab," I said, trying for humor. He didn't smile. "Board meeting at 11. Couldn't reschedule." His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles betraying a sleepless night. "Let's just get this over with." The testing process was quick and clinical. Forms signed, cheeks swabbed, samples labeled. The nurse explained it would take 3 days for results, though we both knew it was just a formality. The test I'd already done told the truth. As we walked to the parking lot afterward, an uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Eric checked his watch repeatedly, clearly anxious to escape. "Want to grab coffee?" I asked impulsively. "Before your meeting?" He looked surprised, then suspicious. "Why?" I shrugged. "Because we're both here. Because we could probably use it. Because we haven't had a civil conversation in about 20 years. "And whose fault is that?" The reflexive accusation slipped out before he could stop it. "Old habits." "Both of ours," I said evenly. "That's kind of my point." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Fine. But I've only got 20 minutes. The coffee shop across from the medical center was busy with morning commuters. We found a small table in the corner, away from the crowd. Eric ordered an elaborate espresso drink. I stuck with black coffee. "So," he said after a few uncomfortable seconds, "you wanted to talk." "Talk." I took a breath. "I've been thinking about what this means, for both of us." "You mean the fact that I'm not really a Bailey?" The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "That Dad was right to treat me like an outsider all those years?" "That's not what I meant." I leaned forward. "And being a Bailey by blood clearly didn't win me any prizes." "Dad was..." I searched for the right word. "An asshole?" Eric supplied. I laughed despite myself. "I was gonna say, complicated, but yeah." "Sometimes?" Eric stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. "He was harder on you. I always knew that." "I just thought..." He trailed off. "That I deserved it?" I finished for him. He shrugged. "That you were the screw-up. That I was doing something right." The honesty stung. "But It was refreshing after years of pretense. And I thought you were the golden child who could do no wrong. Funny how we both had it backwards. He glanced at his watch again. I should go. As he stood to leave, I blurted out, "Have you thought about finding him? Thomas Reynolds?" Eric froze, coffee cup halfway to the trash. Why would I do that? Wouldn't you want to know? Where you come from? Who you really are? I know who I am, he said sharply. I'm Eric Bailey, CEO of Bailey Construction. Robert's son. He paused, jaw working. And your brother? DNA doesn't change that. I nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. Something shifted in his expression, the faintest softening around the eyes. I'll call you after the board meeting. Maybe we can talk more. It wasn't much, but from Eric it was practically an olive branch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days passed without word from Eric. I called twice, left messages he didn't return. On the 4th day, I drove to the Bailey Construction headquarters, a glass and steel monument to Dad's success that I'd visited less than a handful of times in my adult life. The receptionist recognized my last name but still made me wait 40 minutes before buzzing me up to Eric's office. I spent the time studying the lobby photographs, chronicling the company's history. Dad and Thomas Reynolds shaking hands at the groundbreaking of their first major project. Dad accepting awards, cutting ribbons, standing proudly in front of increasingly impressive buildings. Eric appearing in the later photos, always at Dad's side, both wearing identical smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Eric's assistant finally escorted me into an office larger than my first apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. A massive desk dominated the space, covered with architectural models and blueprints. You could have called back, I said by way of greeting. Eric didn't look up from the papers he was reading. Been busy. The Jefferson project is falling apart. Structural issues with the foundation. What kind of issues? He waved dismissively. Nothing you'd understand. We've got engineers working on it. The old Eric, back in full force. I bit back a retort about my engineering degree and years of practical experience. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The test results came back, he said after a moment. Same conclusion as yours. I'm not. He cleared his throat. Robert Bailey isn't my biological father. I waited, sensing there was more. I found Thomas Reynolds, he continued, finally looking up. He's in Seattle, retired 5 years ago. Widower. 2 grown daughters. You contacted him? I couldn't hide my surprise. Eric shook his head. Just did some research. Basic internet stalking. He attempted a smile that came out more like a grimace. He looks like me, same eyes, same chin. I nodded, unsure what to say. Did you know Dad left the company in trouble? Eric asked abruptly, changing the subject. Major trouble, the kind that could sink us within a year? I hadn't known, but I wasn't surprised. Dad had always been better at appearances than substance. Is that what the board meeting was about? Eric laughed humorlessly. That, and whether I'm fit to lead during the crisis. Apparently there have been concerns about my management style. The irony was almost too perfect. Eric, who'd been handed everything without earning it, was now facing the consequences of that entitlement. Part of me, a small, vindictive part one wasn't proud of, wanted to enjoy his struggle. But the larger part recognized the familiar pain of a son trying desperately to live up to Robert Bailey's impossible standards. What are you going to do? I asked. He rubbed his temples. I don't know. The Jefferson project was supposed to be our salvation, a $100 million contract that would keep us afloat while we restructured. But if the foundation issues are as bad as the engineers say... Let me take a look, I said before I could stop myself. At the foundation reports. I might see something they missed. Eric's instinctive reaction was skepticism. You build houses and strip malls. This is a 30-story commercial complex. With a foundation, I countered, Concrete and rebar don't change based on how tall the building is. The principles are the same. He hesitated, then pushed a thick folder across the desk. Knock yourself out. But the engineers we hired are the best in the business. I spent the next 2 hours poring over soil reports, structural analyses, and foundation specifications. The problem wasn't immediately obvious. The design was sound, the materials top grade. But something felt off about the excavation documentation. Who did your geotech survey? I asked, looking up from a puzzling set of measurements. Westfield Engineering. Why? I tapped a section of the report. Because these soil compaction numbers don't match the site conditions. Not for that area of the city. You're building on reclaimed wetland. The water table is too high for these readings to be accurate. Eric frowned. How would you know that? Because I built a medical office complex 3 blocks away last year. Had to install special drainage systems to account for the underground water flow. I shuffled through more papers. Your engineers are basing their solutions on faulty initial data. That's why nothing's working. Eric studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You actually know what you're talking about. Shocking, I know. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. The pathetic little brother might actually have some skills. He had the grace to look ashamed. I never said. You've said it 100 different ways since we were kids, I interrupted. You never needed words. Eric fell silent, turning to look out at the city spread below us. Finally, he spoke without turning around. Can you fix it? The foundation? Not alone. And not without considerable expense. You'll need to redesign the drainage system, possibly restructure parts of the foundation that have already been poured. I closed the folder, but yes, it's fixable. Will you help? He asked, still facing the window. Not as a favor to me, as a paid consultant. Your standard rates, whatever they are. The offer surprised me. In all our years of professional overlap, Eric had never once acknowledged my expertise, let alone sought it out. Why me? You could hire anyone. He turned back, his expression unreadable. Because despite what you think, I'm not completely blind to your accomplishments. Your company has a reputation for solving difficult structural problems. And he hesitated. I trust you not to use this against me with the board. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I considered declining. Working with Eric would mean reopening old wounds, navigating decades of resentment and competition. But there was something else there too. A chance to finally prove my worth on equal footing, to build something together instead of in opposition. I'll need full access to the site and complete authority over the foundation redesign, I said. Done. And I work with my own team. No interference from your people. He nodded. Anything else? I hesitated, then decided to push my luck. Dinner with Mom. Both of us. She should know what's going on. Eric's jaw tightened. She doesn't need to know about the DNA results. She already knows, Eric. She's always known. And she's spent 32 years trying to protect you from finding out. He looked away, blinking rapidly. Fine. Dinner. But I'm not promising to bring it up. Fair enough. We shook hands awkwardly, the gesture formal and strange between brothers. As I gathered the reports to take with me, Eric cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I never thought you were pathetic. Not really. I was just jealous. I looked up, certain I'd misheard. Jealous? Of what? Of how easily everything came to you. School, sports, Dad's expectations. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like our father's it was uncanny, despite the lack of biological connection. You never seemed to care what he thought. You just did your own thing, built your own life. I've been chasing his approval my whole life, and you just walked away from it. The irony of his perception versus my reality was almost laughable. All those years I'd envied his golden child status while he'd envied my independence. We'd been mirror images of insecurity, each thinking the other had it better. I cared, I admitted, probably too much, but I learned pretty early that nothing I did was ever going to be good enough, so I stopped trying to impress him and started trying to impress myself. Eric nodded slowly. Smart move. The compliment, small as it was, felt monumental coming from him. I'll look over these tonight, I said, holding up the reports. Call you tomorrow with some initial thoughts. As I reached the door, Eric called after me. Marshall? I turned. Yeah? Why did you tell me? About the DNA test? You could have kept it to yourself. Used it against me somehow. God knows I probably deserved it. The question had been haunting me too. Why had I upended both our lives with this truth? What had I hoped to gain? I thought it would feel good, I admitted, to watch you deal with being the outsider for once, but it didn't. It just felt sad for both of us. And now? How does it feel now? I considered the question. Like maybe we have a chance to start over. Not as Robert Bailey's sons, but just as us. Whatever that means. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I guess we'll find out. As I drove away from Bailey Construction's gleaming headquarters, I felt lighter somehow. The truth hadn't fixed our broken relationship overnight. It hadn't erased years of hurt or competition, but it had cracked open a door that had been sealed shut for as long as I could remember. Tomorrow, we'd begin the complicated work of repairing a flawed foundation, both literally and figuratively. The structure above might never be perfect, might always bear the marks of its rocky beginning. But with the right support, it could stand strong for years to come. Just like us. The Jefferson Project site sprawled across 3 city blocks, skeletal steel beams reaching skyward like metal fingers against the morning sky. Yellow construction vehicles dotted the massive excavation, idle and waiting, while engineers argued over clipboards and tablets. Work had halted 2 weeks earlier when the first signs of foundation settling appeared. Hairline cracks in concrete that shouldn't have been there, subtle shifts in alignment that threatened the entire structure above. I stood at the edge of the pit, hard hat secured, surveying what would either become Bailey Construction's crowning achievement or its final failure. The scope was undeniably impressive. 30 floors of mixed-use commercial space that would transform this corner of the city. Dad had spent years securing the contract, calling it his legacy project. Now that legacy teetered on the edge of collapse. Your brother said you'd be coming by, a voice said behind me. I turned to find a woman in a reflective vest, safety glasses pushed up into her auburn hair. Grace Winters, site manager. Or former site manager, depending on how this goes. We shook hands. Marshall Bailey, I'm here to help, not assign blame. She snorted. That's refreshing. Your brother's been on a witch hunt for weeks. Sounds like Eric, I said, unable to keep the weariness from my voice. Some patterns were hard to break, even with DNA revelations. Can you show me where the worst settling is occurring? Grace led me down a temporary staircase into the excavation, pointing out areas of concern. Concrete piers showing stress fractures, uneven settling on the western corner, water seepage along the southern wall. The picture became clearer with each step. This wasn't just one problem. It was a cascade of interconnected failures. The original geotech survey missed an underground stream, I said, examining a particularly concerning section where moisture darkened the concrete. Water's following the path of least resistance, undermining your foundation piers. Has anyone checked for abandoned utility tunnels in this area? Grace looked surprised. Not that I know of. The historical survey didn't mention any. City records from the 1940s are notoriously incomplete, I said, making a note on my tablet. My company restored an old warehouse 6 blocks from here. Found 3 undocumented utility tunnels from the war years. This area was all industrial back then. For the next 4 hours, I explored every corner of the massive foundation, taking measurements, documenting cracks, testing moisture levels. The problems were serious, but not insurmountable. With the right approach, the foundation could be salvaged without starting from scratch. An expensive fix, but nothing compared to the cost of demolition and rebuilding. By mid-afternoon, I'd seen enough to develop a preliminary plan. As I climbed out of the excavation, I spotted Eric standing at the edge, talking with a group of men in expensive suits. Board members, most likely, come to see the disaster firsthand. Eric noticed me and broke away from the group. "Well?" he asked without preamble. "How bad is it?" "Fixable," I said, brushing concrete dust from my jeans. "But it'll be costly and time-consuming. You've got water intrusion from an underground stream the original survey missed, plus what I suspect are abandoned utility tunnels creating voids beneath your foundation piers." Eric frowned. "How did our engineers miss this?" "They relied on outdated geological data and didn't account for historical land use." I pulled up diagrams on my tablet. "See these patterns of settling? Classic signs of water undermining. You need a comprehensive drainage solution before you can stabilize the foundation." The technical details seemed to wash over Eric, his eyes glazing slightly. For all his years at Bailey Construction, he'd never spent time in the trenches, never developed the practical knowledge that came from building things with your own hands. "Can you fix it?" he asked finally, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Yes. I'll need 3 weeks and a team of 6 specialists. Complete authority over this portion of the project. And it won't be cheap." He glanced back at the board members, who were watching our conversation with undisguised interest. "Whatever it costs, just save this project." "I'll start tomorrow," I said. "Have your people send over all the documentation you have on the original foundation design and soil testing." As I turned to leave, Eric called after me. "Don't make me regret this, Marshall." I paused. "Is that a vote of confidence or a threat?" "Both," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Dinner with Mom tomorrow night. My place, 7 o'clock. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Mom looked older than I remembered from Dad's funeral. Grief had etched new lines around her eyes, carved hollows in her once full cheeks. She sat primly on Eric's designer sofa, hands folded in her lap, glancing between us with the wariness of someone walking through a minefield. "It's nice," she said carefully, "to see you boys together. Outside of a funeral, I mean." Eric poured wine without meeting her eyes. "Marshall's helping with the Jefferson project. Foundation issues." "That's wonderful," she said with transparent relief that we'd found a safe topic. "Your father would be so proud to see you working together." The mention of Dad hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Eric shot me a warning look that clearly said, "Not now." I ignored it. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad. And about Thomas Reynolds." Her wineglass froze halfway to her lips. For a moment, she looked like she might deny everything, might construct some elaborate fiction to preserve the family mythology. Then her shoulders slumped, and she set down her glass with a soft clink. "How did you find out?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Aunt Claudia," I said, "before she died. Then DNA tests confirmed it." Mom closed her eyes briefly. "Claudia, of course. She never could keep a secret." She looked at Eric, who stood rigid by the window. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I wanted to tell you so many times." "When?" Eric's voice was tight with controlled anger. "When I was 10 and Dad missed my science fair? When I was 16 and he criticized every college choice I made? When I took over the company and he second-guessed every decision?" He set down his glass with enough force that wine sloshed over the rim. "When exactly would have been a good time to mention I wasn't actually his son?" Mom flinched. "It's complicated, Eric. Your father and I." "He wasn't my father," Eric interrupted. "That's the whole point, isn't it?" "He was your father in every way that mattered," Mom insisted. "He raised you, provided for you. He resented me." Eric's words cut like glass. My whole life I felt it, but I never understood why. I thought it was something I was doing wrong, something I could fix if I just tried harder. Mom looked down at her hands. Robert loved you. In his way. His way wasn't enough, Eric said. And now I find out it was all based on a lie. I watched my brother, because despite everything, that's what he was, grapple with the same pain I'd felt growing up. The constant striving for approval, the moving target of Dad's expectations, the hollow ache of never quite measuring up. For the first time, I saw him not as the golden child, but as another casualty of our father's emotional limitations. Did Thomas know? I asked Mom, breaking the tense silence. About Eric? She nodded slowly. He suspected. It's why he left the company, moved to Seattle. Robert threatened to destroy his reputation in the industry if he ever tried to contact you. She looked at Eric. Thomas wanted to be part of your life. Robert wouldn't allow it. Eric absorbed this with a carefully blank expression. And you? What did you want? I wanted to protect you, Mom said simply. From scandal, from confusion, from pain. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed the truth. But I thought... Her voice broke. I thought I was doing what was best. By letting me believe a lie? By watching Dad treat Marshall like the only real son? Eric shook his head. How is that best for anyone? Mom looked stricken. Your father's treatment of you both was complicated. He pushed Marshall harder because he saw himself in him. And he was distant with you because he was afraid of loving you too much, afraid of what that might mean. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading outward. Dad's coldness toward Eric hadn't been rejection but fear. Fear of confronting the truth. Fear of acknowledging the connection he felt despite knowing Eric wasn't his biological child. So he punished us both, I said quietly. Me for being too much his son, and Eric for not being his son at all. Mom nodded, tears spilling now. Robert was a brilliant builder, but a broken man. His own father was cruel, withholding. He never learned how to love without conditions. She looked between us, her sons, products of the same damaged upbringing. I failed you both by not standing up to him. By not demanding better for you. Eric poured himself another glass of wine, movements precise and controlled. Is Thomas still alive? Yes, Mom said. Still in Seattle as far as I know. He sends Christmas cards to my sister every year, never to me directly. He respected those boundaries at least. I want to meet him, Eric said. The statement hung in the air, both question and declaration. Mom hesitated, then nodded. I have his contact information, if you're sure that's what you want. I need to know, Eric said simply. Where I come from. Who I am. You're Eric Bailey, I said, surprising myself with the fierceness in my voice. CEO of Bailey Construction. My brother. DNA doesn't change that. He looked at me, recognition flickering in his eyes as I echoed his own words from days earlier. No, he agreed after a moment. It doesn't. Mom watched this exchange with wonder, as if witnessing something she'd never thought possible. Her sons finding common ground, supporting each other instead of competing. Your father would... This isn't about Dad, I interrupted gently. It's about us. Moving forward. Building something new. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of 18-hour days, mud-caked boots, and technical challenges that pushed the limits of my expertise. I assembled a team of specialists, a hydrologist, 2 structural engineers, a geotechnical expert, and Miguel, whose practical knowledge of concrete work was unmatched. Together, we mapped the underground water flow, located the abandoned utility tunnels I'd suspected, and designed a comprehensive solution to stabilize the foundation. Eric came to the site daily, standing at the edge of the excavation, watching our progress with an intensity that might have been mistaken for micromanagement by someone who didn't know him. But I recognized it for what it was: the desperation of a man whose entire identity hung in the balance. If the Jefferson Project failed, Bailey Construction would likely fold. And without the company, who was Eric Bailey? We're installing the final drainage channels today. I told him one morning as he paced along the perimeter fence. Should be able to pour the reinforcement concrete by Friday. He nodded, distracted. The board wants a full presentation next week. Progress reports, timelines, budget projections. I'll have everything ready, I promised. The solution is solid, Eric. It'll work. He stopped pacing, looking at me directly for the first time that day. I called him. Thomas, we're meeting on Saturday. The news caught me off guard. In Seattle? He's flying in. Just for the day. Eric looked away, uncomfortable with the vulnerability. I asked if he'd meet with both of us. If you want to. The invitation surprised me even more than the news of the meeting. You want me there? Eric shrugged, aiming for casual and missing by miles. Might be easier. Having someone else there. I understood what he couldn't quite say, that facing his biological father after 32 years of absence was terrifying, that having me there would provide a buffer, a witness, someone to share the weight of the moment. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. Relief flickered across his face. Thanks. The word hung between us, simple but profound. When was the last time Eric had thanked me for anything? Had he ever? We met Thomas Reynolds at a quiet restaurant downtown, neutral ground for a reunion decades in the making. He was tall like Eric, with the same square jaw and deep-set eyes, though his were faded blue rather than Eric's brown. Silver hair, neatly trimmed beard, hands that showed the calluses of someone who still worked with them despite his age and success. Eric, he said when we approached the table, rising to his feet, voice thick with emotion. My God, you look so. He trailed off, overwhelmed. Eric stood stiffly, accepting Thomas's handshake, but not returning the warmth. Thank you for coming, he said formally, as if this were a business meeting rather than a life-altering encounter. And you must be Marshall, Thomas said, turning to me with a genuine smile. Robert's son, I see him in you. The observation was both accurate and painful. Nice to meet you, I said, shaking his hand. We settled into an awkward silence, the weight of 3 decades of secrets pressing down on the table between us. Thomas ordered coffee with a steady voice that belied the emotion evident in his eyes. He couldn't stop looking at Eric, cataloging the features they shared, the mannerisms that transcended nurture. I wanted to reach out so many times, Thomas said finally. When you graduated college. When you took over the company. When Robert passed. He twisted his coffee cup in his hands. I respected the agreement, but it was difficult. What agreement? Eric asked sharply. Thomas glanced at me, then back to Eric. Your mother didn't tell you? She said Dad threatened to ruin your career if you contacted me, Eric said. Is there more? Thomas nodded slowly. Robert agreed not to contest paternity legally, which would have created a public scandal, if I agreed to leave the company and stay away from all of you. He paused. And if I transferred my shares in Bailey Construction to him? Eric's head snapped up. You are a founding partner. 40% ownership, Thomas confirmed. We built the company together, Robert and I. Had equal shares initially, then I increased my stake when we expanded. The implications landed like a thunderclap. Dad hadn't just pushed Thomas out of the family. He'd leveraged the situation to gain complete control of the company they'd built together. So he bought your silence with your own company, Eric said, voice tight with anger, and then spent the next 30 years pretending you never existed. Thomas's expression softened. Robert was many things, but he wasn't a monster. He was hurt, angry, afraid of losing everything he'd built. We'd been friends since college, partners for a decade. What happened with your mother? He shook his head. It wasn't planned. It wasn't an affair, not really. Just one night when Robert was away on business, when both Sarah and I were lonely, feeling overlooked. One night? Eric repeated flatly. That's all it took to blow up 3 lives. 4 lives, Thomas corrected gently. Yours most of all, and for that, I'm truly sorry. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table. I know this doesn't make up for 32 years of absence, but I want you to have it. Eric made no move to take the envelope. What is it? Shares in my company, Reynolds Development. 40%, to match what I once had in Bailey Construction. Thomas pushed the envelope closer. It's yours, regardless of what happens next. Whether you want me in your life or not. Eric stared at the envelope, emotions warring across his face. I don't need your money. It's not about money, Thomas said. It's about legacy. About acknowledging you as my son, publicly and legally. He paused. I have 2 daughters from my marriage. They know about you now. They'd like to meet their half-brother someday, if you're open to that. The word, brother, hung in the air, reminding me of my own complicated relationship with Eric. We'd spent our lives as adversaries rather than allies, each believing the other had the easier path. How different might things have been if we'd recognized our shared struggle against Dad's impossible standards? I don't know what I want yet, Eric said honestly. This is all still. Of course, Thomas said quickly. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He smiled slightly. Not again. As the meeting concluded, Thomas pulled me aside while Eric settled the bill. Take care of him, he said quietly. He's putting on a brave face, but this can't be easy. We're taking care of each other these days, I replied. Finally. Thomas nodded, understanding the significance. Robert would be proud. Beneath everything else, he wanted you boys to be close. He just didn't know how to make that happen. We're figuring it out on our own, I said. Better late than never. The following week we presented our foundation solution to the Bailey Construction Board. Eric led the meeting with a confidence I'd never seen in him before. Not the brittle arrogance he'd always hidden behind, but genuine self-assurance based on understanding the project and believing in our approach. The original foundation design was sound, he explained, gesturing to the detailed schematics we'd prepared. But it didn't account for site-specific hydrological conditions. The solution my brother's team developed addresses those conditions without requiring a complete rebuild. And the cost? Asked one board member. A silver-haired man who'd worked with our father for decades. Significant but manageable, Eric admitted. Still well below what demolition and starting over would cost. We've adjusted the project timeline to accommodate the additional work without delaying completion beyond 1 quarter. The presentation continued for another hour, Eric fielding questions with a competence that clearly surprised the board members. When he deferred technical questions to me, it wasn't with resentment, but with respect for my expertise. We functioned as a team, complementing each other's strengths rather than competing. After the board unanimously approved our plan, Eric caught up with me in the parking garage. Drinks? To celebrate? We ended up at a dive bar near my office, the kind of place Eric would never have set foot in before. Sitting in a scarred wooden booth, nursing beers that cost a fraction of what he usually drank, we talked about the project, about Thomas, about the future. I'm thinking of bringing you on, Eric said suddenly. Officially, as chief structural officer or something. We'd create the position. I nearly choked on my beer. You want me to work for Bailey Construction? For you? With me, he corrected. Equal partners. Different areas of expertise. He took a long pull of his beer. The company needs your knowledge, your hands-on experience. I can handle the business side, the client relationships, the big picture. But you understand building in a way I never will. The offer was tempting in ways I hadn't expected. To help reshape the company our father had built, to work alongside my brother instead of in his shadow. But there were complications. History that couldn't be erased with one successful project. What about my company? I asked. I've spent 10 years building it. Bring your team, Eric suggested. We could structure it as a subsidiary initially, maintain the brand you've established, eventually merge operations if it makes sense. And the board? Would they approve bringing in the black sheep son as an equal partner? Eric smiled. After today's presentation, they'd approve appointing you CEO if I suggested it. He grew serious. Look, I know we have a lot of baggage. 35 years of competition and resentment don't disappear overnight. But these past few weeks, working together on the Jefferson project, it felt right. Like maybe this is what we were supposed to be doing all along. I thought about Miguel's words from weeks earlier. Family's overrated. Friends are the family you choose. Maybe the trick was finding a way to choose the family you were born into, to rebuild those relationships on your own terms rather than the dysfunctional patterns established in childhood. I'll think about it, I promised. It's a big decision. Eric nodded, understanding. No rush. The offer stands. He hesitated, then added, whatever you decide, things are different now. Between us, I mean. Because of the DNA test? I asked. Because we're not actually full brothers? He shook his head. Because we finally stopped trying to be what Dad wanted and started figuring out who we actually are. Brothers by choice, not just by blood, or lack thereof. As we clinked bottles in agreement, I realized that sometimes the strongest foundations are built not on blood but on understanding, not on obligation but on choice. Eric and I were laying the groundwork for something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition, on supporting each other's strengths rather than exploiting weaknesses. Like any foundation, it would require maintenance, attention to cracks before they became structural problems. But with care and commitment, it could support whatever we chose to build upon it. And that was a legacy worth creating. 6 months after we stabilized the Jefferson Project Foundation, I stood on the 25th floor of the rising tower, wind whipping through the skeletal framework of what would soon be the most prestigious business address in the city. Below me, construction crews moved with coordinated precision, pouring concrete, welding steel, transforming blueprints into physical reality. Quite a view, said a voice behind me. Thomas Reynolds stepped carefully around a stack of rebar, looking remarkably at ease on the unfinished floor despite his 70 years. Reminds me of my first high-rise with Robert, back when we were too young to know what was impossible. I smiled, offering him a hand as he navigated across an uneven section. Eric should be here soon. He's wrapping up a meeting with investors. Thomas nodded, gazing out at the city skyline. I still can't believe you've both welcomed me into your lives so completely. After everything that happened. Family is complicated, I said, echoing words Eric had spoken just last week. But worth figuring out. The past 6 months had brought changes none of us could have predicted. After much deliberation, I'd accepted Eric's offer to join Bailey Construction, not as an employee, but as a partner. We'd restructured the company, maintaining my smaller firm as a subsidiary that specialized in challenging foundation work while integrating my team's expertise into larger Bailey projects. The board had approved the changes unanimously, recognizing that our complementary skills created a stronger whole. Eric handled client relationships, business strategy, and financial planning. I oversaw structural design, quality control, and on-site problem-solving. Together, we were rebuilding Bailey Construction from the ground up, just as we'd rebuilt the Jefferson Project's foundation. Thomas had become an unexpected ally in this transformation. Though he maintained his primary residence in Seattle, he'd begun spending 1 week each month in the city, consulting on projects, sharing his decades of experience, and slowly building relationships with the sons he'd been forced to abandon. One biological, one not, both now claiming him as family. There he is, Thomas said, pointing toward the construction elevator where Eric had just emerged. My brother walked toward us with the confident stride of a CEO, but his face bore a smile that had once been rare and was now becoming familiar. Sorry I'm late, Eric said, clasping Thomas's shoulder in greeting. The Singapore investors had questions about our sustainability commitments. And? I prompted. Signed, Eric confirmed with satisfaction. Full funding for the next 3 phases. We're expanding into green building technologies, just like we discussed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The success tasted sweeter for being shared. In the past, Eric would have claimed full credit for such an achievement, dismissing my contributions as peripheral. Now, he readily acknowledged our partnership, the way our different strengths had combined to save the company our father had nearly driven into the ground. We should celebrate, Thomas suggested. Dinner tonight? I'd like to visit the old steakhouse Robert and I used to frequent after signing big deals. A shadow passed briefly over Eric's face at the mention of our father, but he nodded. Porter's, they still make the best ribeye in town. Sarah should join us, Thomas added, referring to our mother by her first name as he always did, with a gentle respect that acknowledged their complicated history. If she's comfortable with that. The relationship between Thomas and our mother had evolved cautiously over the past months. Their initial reunion had been stilted, heavy, with 3 decades of unspoken regrets and might-have-beens. But time and honest conversation had softened the awkwardness, allowing something like friendship to emerge from the ashes of their brief connection. "I'll call her," I offered. She mentioned wanting to discuss the Foundation's annual gala anyway. The Robert Bailey Memorial Foundation had been Eric's idea, a nonprofit dedicated to providing construction training and apprenticeships to at-risk youth. Using a portion of the company's profits, we funded scholarships, equipment, and mentorship programs, creating pathways into the industry for young people who might otherwise never find their way. It had been Eric's way of reclaiming our father's legacy while simultaneously transforming it into something more meaningful than the pursuit of profit and prestige that had defined Dad's career. The foundation represented the best of what Bailey could be, not just building structures, but building futures. "Marshall," Eric called, gesturing me toward the eastern edge of the floor. "Come look at this." I joined him, looking out at the view he'd indicated. Not the downtown skyline that dominated the western exposure, but the neighborhood to the east, where smaller buildings clustered. Among them, barely visible from this height, was the medical office complex I'd built before joining Bailey Construction, my first major independent project. "Remember when you told me you built that?" Eric asked. I dismissed it as insignificant compared to what we were doing here. I nodded, recalling his condescension. "You said I built houses and strip malls." "I was wrong," he admitted. "Not just about your skills, but about what matters in building." He gestured toward the Jefferson Tower rising around us. "This is impressive, sure, but that medical center serves thousands of people who couldn't access healthcare before. It has substance, purpose." He looked at me directly. "Like you always did." The compliment landed like an unexpected gift. Even after months of improved relations, these moments of vulnerability from Eric still surprised me. "We're building something that matters here too," I said, gesturing to the tower. "Sustainable design, community spaces, local contractors." Dad would have cut corners on all of that. "Dad would have fired me by now," Eric said with a wry smile, "for risking his precious profit margins on ethical considerations." "He might have surprised you," Thomas interjected, joining our conversation. Robert wasn't always so rigid. In the early days, we built with purpose, with community in mind. The profit above all mentality came later, after the Reynolds-Bailey split. He gazed out at the city that bore so many marks of his and my father's work. Success changed him, or maybe fear of losing what he'd gained. These glimpses of a different Robert Bailey, the man who had been Thomas's friend, who had once built with integrity before ambition hardened him, helped us piece together a more complete picture of our father. Not a saint, certainly, but perhaps not the villain of our childhood memories either. Just a flawed man who'd made painful choices and lived with their consequences. "He would be proud of what you're building now," Thomas said. "Not just the structures, but the relationships. The legacy that matters." As we stood together on the unfinished floor, 3 men connected by choice as much as by blood or its absence, I felt the truth of Thomas's words. We were building something our father had never quite managed, despite all his success. A foundation of mutual respect and understanding that could weather any storm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dinner at Porter's Steakhouse that evening brought another surprise. Mom arrived with news of her own, a decision to return to university and complete the architecture degree she'd abandoned when she became pregnant with me at 22. "I always regretted not finishing," she admitted, nervously twisting her napkin. "Robert didn't see the point once we started having children. Said one architect in the family was enough." "That's wonderful, Mom," I said, genuinely pleased. "The industry needs more women designers." Eric raised his glass. "To Mom, the future architect. Bailey Construction's new secret weapon." She blushed with pleasure at our support. "I'm thinking of specializing in accessible design, creating spaces that work for people with disabilities, older adults, families with young children. Her eyes lit up as she described her ideas. Universal design principles benefit everyone, not just those with specific needs. Sarah always had an eye for practical solutions, Thomas said, his tone warm with admiration. I remember when she redesigned the office layout at our first headquarters. Doubled our efficiency overnight. The evening unfolded with easy conversation, shared memories, and plans for the future. All things that would have been unimaginable a year earlier when our family had been fractured by secrets and resentments. The healing wasn't complete. Some wounds ran too deep for simple remedies, but we were building something new on the broken foundation of our past. As dinner concluded, Eric surprised us all by clearing his throat and raising his glass once more. I have an announcement, he said, uncharacteristically hesitant. I've decided to meet my half-sisters, Thomas's daughters, next month in Seattle. Thomas's face brightened with joy. They'll be thrilled, Eric. Melissa and Claire have been hoping you'd be ready. I'm nervous, Eric admitted, vulnerability still a new and uncomfortable fit. What if they resent me? Or expect some kind of instant bond? They're good people, Thomas assured him. They understand this is complicated for everyone. No pressure, just connection. The chance to know each other. I watched my brother absorb this, saw the mixture of anxiety and hope in his expression. The Eric of a year ago would have hidden such feelings behind a mask of confidence or dismissal. This new willingness to acknowledge uncertainty, to risk disappointment in pursuit of meaningful relationships, marked the most profound change in him. I'll go with you, I offered impulsively, if you want the company. Eric's surprise gave way to visible relief. You do that? That's what brothers are for, I said simply. Mom reached across the table to squeeze both our hands, eyes shining. I never thought I'd see this day, she said softly. My boys, supporting each other instead of competing. We wasted a lot of years, Eric acknowledged, but we're making up for lost time. The following month found us in Seattle, standing before Thomas's elegant colonial home in a quiet neighborhood overlooking Puget Sound. Rain misted down around us as Eric hesitated on the front step, hand raised to knock but not quite making contact. Second thoughts? I asked quietly. He shook his head. Just taking a moment. 32 years of not knowing I had sisters, and now they're probably just as nervous, I pointed out. New brother showing up with all this complicated history. Eric nodded, squaring his shoulders. Right. No turning back now. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman in her late 20s, with Thomas's blue eyes and a tentative smile. You must be Eric, she said. I'm Melissa. I've been watching through the window for the past 5 minutes. Dad said to let you take your time, but I got impatient. The tension broke, and Eric laughed, a genuine sound of relief. Guilty as charged. This is my brother, Marshall. The builder, she said, shaking my hand. Dad talks about you both constantly. Come in out of the rain. Claire's making her famous lasagna, and Dad's pretending to help while mostly getting in the way. Inside, Thomas's Seattle home revealed a life we'd known nothing about until recently. Family photos chronicling his daughters, growth, bookshelves filled with engineering texts alongside children's picture books preserved from earlier years, a baby grand piano where Claire, the younger daughter, had apparently won several competitions. It's strange, Eric confided as we helped set the table for dinner. Seeing this whole life he built without us, all these years, all these memories we weren't part of. We could say the same, Melissa pointed out, overhearing as she placed a salad bowl on the table. We grew up with stories about Dad's early career, his partnership with Robert Bailey, but never knew he had another son. It's like discovering a parallel universe that was running alongside ours the whole time. The observation was astute, acknowledging the mutual loss without assigning blame. Throughout dinner, both sisters showed the same thoughtful approach, asking questions about our lives without pushing, sharing their own experiences without expectation. They had Thomas's directness tempered with a warmth that must have come from their mother, Thomas's late wife, who had known about Eric's existence and supported Thomas's annual Christmas cards to Mom's sister, his one tenuous connection to the son he'd been forced to abandon. By dessert, the initial awkwardness had given way to cautious connection. Claire, a pediatric surgeon whose analytical mind reminded me of Eric's, engaged him in a discussion of healthcare facility design that revealed common interests neither had anticipated. Melissa, an environmental lawyer, found common ground with me over sustainable building practices. "You know," Thomas said, watching his children, all three of them, with undisguised emotion, "I used to imagine this. All of you, together, knowing each other. I never thought it would actually happen." "Life has a way of coming full circle," I observed. "Dad spent decades keeping this family apart, and now here we are, building bridges he tried to burn." "Robert was afraid," Thomas said, "not for the first time. Afraid of losing what mattered to him. The irony is, his fear created exactly what he was trying to prevent: distance from his sons, fractures in his family." "Fear is a poor foundation for anything," Eric said, the insight striking in its simplicity. "Business, family, identity. It all crumbles eventually if fear is the only thing holding it together." The weekend in Seattle marked another turning point in our evolving family story. Eric and I flew home with promises of future visits, invitations for the sisters to see the Jefferson Project upon its completion, tentative plans for a holiday gathering that would bring together all the branches of our complicated family tree. "What do you think Dad would make of all this?" Eric asked as our plane descended toward home. Us connecting with Thomas, meeting the sisters, rebuilding the company together. I considered the question carefully. I think part of him would be furious, the part that spent decades constructing this elaborate fiction about our family. But maybe another part would be relieved that the truth finally came out, that we found a way forward that he couldn't see. Eric nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about something Thomas said, that Dad wasn't always so driven by profit and prestige." That fear changed him. He gazed out the window at the city coming into view below. "I don't want to make the same mistake. I don't want fear to dictate my choices." "Is that why you're meeting with the adoption agency next week?" I asked. He looked surprised. "Mom told you?" "She mentioned it. Said you'd been considering it for a while." Eric's desire to adopt as a single father had been a closely guarded secret until recently. After his divorce 3 years earlier, he'd put aside the idea of fatherhood, focusing entirely on the company. But our family revelations had sparked a reevaluation of his priorities, a recognition that legacy meant more than corporate success. "I kept putting it off, telling myself I was too busy, the timing wasn't right," he admitted, but that was just fear talking. Fear of not being good enough, of repeating Dad's mistakes. He met my gaze directly. "I don't want to wait until I'm Thomas's age to realize what I missed by playing it safe." "You'll be a good father," I said with conviction. "Better than Dad was. You've already learned from his mistakes." "We both have," Eric replied. "And we'll keep learning. That's the difference." As the plane touched down, I thought about the foundations we'd been building, in business, in family, in ourselves. Unlike concrete and steel, human foundations aren't set once and finished. They require constant maintenance, adaptation to changing conditions, willingness to repair cracks before they become structural failures. 1 year after discovering the truth that had fractured and then ultimately strengthened our family, we gathered at the Jefferson Project for its official opening. The gleaming tower stood as a testament to what could be built on a properly reinforced foundation, not just physically but metaphorically. Mom arrived with her architecture classmates, proudly giving them insider details about the building's design. Thomas flew in from Seattle with Melissa and Claire, the three of them now regular visitors to the city where their family story had begun. Eric stood at the podium to deliver remarks, confidence balanced with the humility he'd earned through facing hard truths. "The Jefferson Project represents more than steel and glass," he told the assembled crowd. "It stands as proof that with the right foundation, anything can be built or rebuilt." His gaze found mine in the audience. "My brother Marshall taught me that. When this project faced collapse, he showed me that even the most damaged foundation can be saved with the right expertise and honest assessment." The personal meaning beneath his public words wasn't lost on those who knew our story. We had saved more than a building. We had salvaged a family from the wreckage of secrets and resentments that might have destroyed it completely. Later, as champagne flowed and business leaders congratulated us on the project's success, Eric pulled me aside to a quiet corner of the reception. "I got the call this morning," he said, voice tight with controlled emotion. "The adoption agency. They've matched me with a 4-year-old boy. I meet him next week." Joy surged through me. "Eric, that's incredible news." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm terrible at this? What if I turn into Dad without meaning to?" "You won't," I said firmly. "And you're not doing it alone. You have me, Mom, Thomas, the sisters, a whole family to help." I gripped his shoulder. "This kid is getting the Uncle Starter Pack, complete with construction site tours and power tool lessons as soon as he's old enough." Eric laughed, tension releasing. "I'm counting on it. He'll need someone to balance out my uptight corporate influence." "We balance each other," I reminded him. "That's how we fixed this place when everyone said it couldn't be done." As the celebration continued around us, I reflected on how far we'd come from that moment a year ago when I'd stood in my driveway, staring at DNA test results that would change everything. The truth had been painful, disorienting, even devastating at first. But from that shattered foundation, we'd built something stronger than what had existed before. A family defined not by blood or obligation, but by choice and understanding. Like any good builder knows, sometimes the strongest structures rise from the ruins of what came before, not erasing the past but incorporating it, learning from its failures, and creating something that can withstand whatever storms the future might bring.